So, welcome everyone for another dialogue on the governance of on IoT, data, identity, all of these things. And today we're very happy to have three speakers. We have David Lee joining us, I think from Shanghai now or Shenzhen. Is it where are you now, David?
I'm actually in Shenzhen.
Shenzhen. And
I'm
we
in
have
Shenzhen.
Shenzhen, yes. And we have David Cuartelles from Arduino. And we have Adele Yarolina from the European Startup Network. And hi, David. And David's in Malmo at the moment. So, and the idea is that we'll have a kind of a conversation, a kind of a roundtable, but also kind of stories. And the idea is basically, David, start with you. And I think we met in Shanghai, I think it's now 10 years ago. I think it was because you were running the first hack lab in Shanghai, maybe 10 years ago, maybe even more, I'm not sure, or less, but somehow some in between there. And I remember sort of being in the space and being thoroughly impressed with all of this. And since then, I think you've been basically spearheading the kind of maker movement also in China, and currently running the Open Innovation Lab in Shenzhen. So we thought it was a good moment now to have this conversation. Say this maker movement it's been happening now for, let's say, I think Arduino was kind of Italy 2003, 2004. Ivrea design sort of started like 15 years, 17 years, 20 years now. So it's kind of a good idea to think sort of where are we now? And so David, can you sort of tell us a little bit about what's happening at the moment in Shenzhen in China with the makers? Sort of is it and also a little bit about scale, sort of and network sort of thing. So yes, please go ahead.
All right. So thanks Rob for setting this up. It's great to be here. I think just give it a little bit of context of what we come to where we are. I used to be involved in internet startup as serial entrepreneurs involving in a few internet companies since the 90s. So 2010, just by accident, got into the maker movement. I think around 2008, that's when I discovered Arduino. And as a software guys, Arduino is godsend. Just easy plug-in, do some cool stuff. And then slowly over time, tons of Arduino sensors, 3D printers, all that stuff is caught in my house. So everything got kicked out of my house by my wife. And then that's how these to the setting up of the first makerspace in Shanghai. At the same time, we set up the makerspace. It's called Xin Chejian. In Chinese, it's roughly translate into it's called new factories. We started this inside co-working space called Xindanwei, which is the new work units. And this is back in 2008, 2009. Xindanwei is where a lot of the academics, a lot of the intellectual people, interesting, curious artists were gathering. So along with two friends, when we set up the first makerspace, along with two friends, Anna Greenspan of NYU Shanghai and Sophia Lerner. Now she's in the University of Michigan. So we're getting around in the space and starting to ponder the question: this makers, free spirit, everybody can make something kind of attitudes. And we set up to start in the research hub called Have Matter, with the ideas of the, well, this maker movement, very much individual empowerment, creativity and everything, and how that is going to have impact on this huge monolithic mass manufacture ecosystem in China. But as we embark on this research, and the more we dig into what people would think about this mass manufacture ecosystem in China, is actually having the characteristic of what we are looking for in the maker movement, but in a much larger industrial scale. So the research led us to Shenzhen. So I started to spend time in Shenzhen since 2010, and coming back and forth, doing research, interviewing people, talking to all different kind of the players in the ecosystem. And then we're starting to realize Shenzhen itself was founded on the same freedom was given to the makers. It's open source, open knowledge sharing. It's open source hardware, or it's open hardware. Let's try not to get into too technical definition of open source. And on the back of that is also Shenzhen in
Yeah, I think you're dropping, David.
take advantage of. Am I still online?
Yes, now you, yes.
Sorry, I think my connection is not as stable as I like.
Neither is mine. So we seem.
So you can still hear me?
Yeah.
Wow, yes, technologies.
Yeah. Yes. So if you can you explain a bit how you went to the Open Innovation Lab? How you came to think to set that up?
Yeah. So because what we publish, we actually caught the attention of a couple people in Shenzhen. We basically wrote about how Shenzhen empowering this open innovation ecosystem with bottom-up innovation, with open access to a lot of technology with huge cooperations. So 2015, we got a grant from the Shenzhen government to start it, the Shenzhen Open Innovation Lab. So what we do is three things. We continue to do research on the open innovation ecosystem, and we actually took this beyond Shenzhen. We went out to Taobao Village. We went out to looking at the electric vehicle ecosystem in China. And second of all is we host a lot of events in Shenzhen to help people understand how this ecosystem works and how to engage with it. And the third part is we help entrepreneurs around the world to look at how this
So I think we may have just lost David. I think that let's just hold on a second and see if we can bring him back on stage. think he's being re-invited. So let's hang on just a little bit. Go and grab a coffee. There you are, back again. Yes. Hi, David.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes, I think you're back again,
So-
and sort of you mentioned the three things from the lab, from the Open Innovation Lab in Shenzhen, the research, and also basically the fact that you're working with a lot of international partners now.
Yeah, so we're really looking at Shenzhen as a place to rethinking about how to make hardware. I mean, first of all, nobody makes hardware from scratch here. Everybody builds on top of everybody else's efforts. And there's a lot of competition, but there's also a lot of cooperations. Second of all is the making hardware here is pursuit of entrepreneurship rather than creative expressions. So people are making things because other people need it, not making things because I feel like this should exist. And that's a fine distinction between attitudes. And the Shenzhen pattern of the open technology, open access corporations, we see that repeated in all different areas. We found it in rural village. We found it in the electric vehicle industry here as well. So that's the. But I think what Shenzhen signify is really the way to re-looking at what is the open ecosystem, and how is the actors of the open ecosystem what to do with position themselves related to the system, and how this system can react to events. And this year has been particularly dramatic years. I mean, of course, the China got hit by COVID in January, and that's a huge need for the for masks, for personal protection equipments. And by February, I think the Shenzhen got into actions. Ecosystem here is not just good at making electronics, it's also good at making the machines who make stuff. So company pivot themselves, manufacturer pivot themselves, going to making the machines needed for the mask, and starting to drive up the production of masks. So just some numbers. In the beginning of this year, the Chinese mass production output was 60 million masks a day. Today, it's running at about 300 million masks a day. And this is supplying the PPE to a lot of countries. And this is not the efforts by any individual company. This is the effort of the the effort of the huge cooperation across the industry.
So basically, this kind of
I think
ecosystem, yeah,
a lot to talk about in this open ecosystem, and to reflect in on how we can collaborate in different areas.
Thanks, David. I think so. We'll come back to this ecosystem and this kind of ecosystem management. I think because I think that's kind of a key. Now, going to David in Malmo, David Cuartelles from Arduino, I think, so David, if you go back to, let's say we don't go back to the beginning, but let's say 2003, 2004, Arduino kind of started. Do you see kind of a similar evolvement that David sketched? Do you also feel that that's kind of your story with Arduino?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that from the beginning, we didn't have an entrepreneur approach to the matter here. So I think that's really a big difference. We were at the complete opposite side of the spectrum of what David described. So he actually made a big distinction between doing these things for the profit, doing these things for personal expression need. And me and my partner were most concerned with designing technology for other people to learn about technology. So it was a bit of a meta use of technology, and there was no clear interest in creating a company or, going out global and selling every country in the world. What has happened, but that was I would almost say a coincidence. So it was a need, and then we just filled in that need magically. And I think there is a big difference, because when we started, there was no general interest. We were working ahead of our time. We spent 5 years basically where we made a total of 100,000 euros. So that's impossible for a company. It's like and Shenzhen as a let's say ecosystem by itself is already a very interesting place where already things were happening, when suddenly the maker culture just came to show up and get mixed up. So I think the point of departure is entirely different. And there's been quite a lot of work done also in academia around this. And there's been research done around why Shenzhen has worked so well and not other places. And there were other places that had a possibility of competing against Shenzhen, but Shenzhen was a lot more clever as, let's say, a meta entity. For example, Seoul in Korea had like a very interesting city neighborhood that was also dedicated entirely to electronics. But the local city planners had a very different plan for it. So it transformed into something else, and the whole idea of manufacturing and small-scale to mid-scale manufacturing disappeared. So that collaboration that happened in Shenzhen couldn't happen in this case. I remember a talk by Eric Pan from Seed Studio when he was running a workshop at Maker Faire Rome about the maker culture, and he had this workshop where he was getting people to think about how to manufacture hats and scale up the manufacturing of hats. He mentioned that when he was manufacturing nanocopters, and he actually designs a Swedish designer from nanocopter, the one from BitCraze, he realized that very quickly, almost down the street, somebody started to copy his nanocopters. And instead of like going against that other company, he realized that the other guy had a better way of manufacturing the propellers. He could get the propellers cheaper from them than if he made them himself. So he figured out a way to collaborate. And that's a very interesting approach that can happen when there is like so many points to collaborate or compare to, as you can find in a single place in Shenzhen, right? But you cannot find that anywhere in Europe at this point, not even in the whole of Europe at the same time. So I think that really is a very big difference. It's like having all of the resources at your door are not having them. Like if I want to prototype something, I'm very lucky. I live in Malmo. There is one store that sells electronics. I can step in, but that doesn't happen anywhere else in Sweden. So how would a student do in, I don't know, Skellefteå, for example? If they want to prototype something, the only way they can do it is if they buy online and they wait for getting things online. And it's very different from getting the parts in your hand. Like I have buttons on my desk here. It's very different if you have these things in your hand and you can touch them and you can measure them. Then you have to do everything based on a data sheet. The learning experience is very different, and that's very much in the maker's ethos, right? It's like there is this idea of doing and touching and feeling that you cannot get anywhere in Europe these days, and I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, I think also, as you described from the beginning, that Arduino was also a way about learning designers how to deal with engineering and hardware and all kinds of things that normally they would only, as you exactly just said now, just look at and not experience or feel. And in that respect, of course, the fact that it sort of came out of this design education and the fact that it became this kind of meta theory growing into an actual way of working, I would say, is indeed a very, very different start point. But if we would look at the situation now, so kind of normally we would say there's kind of there's a messy kind of environment where people do things, kind of lone entrepreneurs, and they're all doing things. Then we have this kind of industrial 4.0, the industrial internet, and then there's this kind of middle. And that's always been a way to describe, I would say, things. And so do you sort of, and then of course the question always is now, for example, Arduino, is it sort of bridging this gap? Is it going into this industrial kind of thing? But the way I'm looking at it from now, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. Sort of, I think so. So sort of, is this idea about the startups and the scale-ups and then moving into this more industrial space? So from your actual practice today, David, from Arduino days, sort of, how are you looking at this? What kind of do you think that this type of thinking or this kind of idea of positions actually makes sense, or not?
Okay, so I think well, first of all, I think that IoT is slowly becoming something. Until recently, IoT was just a concept, and everybody were talking about it, but nobody really knew what they were talking about. And I think that's it's a very common thing. And like yourself, Rob, you've been in surfing the wave for many years now. And in the beginning, IoT was about something that is very, it was not formed, because we were talking about the domotic household when most people already lived in a household that couldn't be augmented with technology in an easy way, right?
Yeah.
Like 2007, I got a paper in a journal talking about ubiquitous computing in the home, where we realized that it was so hard to install some equipment that we decided that installing it with wires was actually easier than wireless because of some configuration considerations. It was going to be much harder to remove it from place, and what's going to be much harder to deconfigure the system. So the reality was clashing against the technology for a really long time. But nowadays we're starting to see devices that can run without batteries. We're starting to see devices that can cover hundreds of kilometers of distance on very simple, very tiny radios. We're starting to see cloud systems that can scale up and can collect, millions of data points per second. So when the concept started, nothing of this was possible.
No.
And I think when I look at that, the problem also is that when we concept started, there was a lot of people that could actually, as single entrepreneurs, really build something. Nowadays, you need to have a lot of people involved to build anything in the ecosystem. So that idea of the maker coming in and becoming part of the thing, I think it's a bit more steep than it was before.
I think well, also what you're saying is that I think for those who are not really familiar with the terms, we have the cloud and the edge and sort of all this idea. Well, the cloud actually basically is a bunch of computers somewhere, but the edge, people talk about closer to the devices or on the devices, and actually I think, as you were always also saying, that's where, according to a lot of experts, things seem to go when it's the fact that that battery power gets better. The chips get much cheaper, but they get more performative. So we can embed architectures, or we can embed operating systems on these chips. And then we can also start embedding more processes, like a little bit more analytics already of the data coming from what is being measured or what is being censored. So so the trend sort of is going to the direction that you're describing, and that trend is actually quite, I would say, quite in line with what Arduino is offering, and also with what Arduino is now partnering with the major chip manufacturers. So I think so. This whole notion of, let's say, a messy environment, a middle, and a kind of a large network, it seems that this idea already is being contradicted by what's happening, and that we will see a much more kind of much more, I would hope to see a much more local approach away from these kind of big cloud providers to much more a local ecosystem, I think, in which players like Arduino are extremely well placed to work.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah. So to basically address the part of the audience that might not necessarily understand the whole technical mumble jumble, I think one of the biggest challenges is the maintenance of the platforms. By platform, I mean the full, some people call it the ecosystem, but it's the full vertical in the IoT space that goes from the physical device that measures something to the app in your phone that shows you the data when you're not at home, for example. And so the question is how to maintain every one of the steps in this very complex system where there is bits and pieces of open source devices, open source software, servers, and so on and so forth. And the way of being able of building these things is typically by building an infrastructure that depends on third parties that are much larger than you. So the big providers of infrastructures right now are Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and even Apple. So if you want to run a, let's say, sensor network, you might run the sensor network locally, but the moment you want to like build dashboard infrastructure and resilient technologies that can support, for example, a potential DDoS attack or whatever, you end up falling into one of these technologies or one of these big providers. And I think that's one of the challenges, right? Like the ecosystem is so complex that it's really hard to build it being independent from these third parties. And when Rob, when you're talking about this in between entities, I think they have a really hard time to exist. It's like they cannot just go and build a data center and populate multiple data centers to have resilience, physical resilience to attacks, for example. It's very complex. It's very hard. So in this IoT, in the IoT space, I think this idea of the small producer or mid-sized producer is a bit of I wouldn't say it's a lie. I mean, I think the bigger entities, they need the medium producers because they rely on the long tail. Just to quote Chris Anderson, they rely on the long tail to actually big business. They need these smaller players to harvest customers, so to say, and bring in sensor technologies to their platforms. But the things that they offer these platforms that are almost self-contained. Like let's take, for example, Bluemix from IBM. It's like it offers you like the whole everything, and they just go and just like program your application and you design the flows. Here's where data is going to come out. This is where I'm going to get my analytics, and here's where the dashboard is going to be built to the final customer. And you're so dependent on this programmable infrastructure that it's really hard for you to migrate to a different cloud, right? So and also it's really hard for you to design these things from scratch because you depend anyway on these existing clouds. So I think that's where the problems start for these mid-size endeavors. And I think that David Lee is very good at pointing out that what happens in Shenzhen is that they're working very much with hardware, where you can still have some control, but we don't have that control. So we depend on Shenzhen to get the hardware. And when I say we, I mean Europe in general. And then we depend on a lot of these cloud services that also typically belong to the US, so that we can actually implement our technologies. So it's a very complex equation.
Yeah, No, I think so. What you're describing then sort of basically is that that sort of at the moment we're kind of in the middle, and so we get the hardware from one place, and then we get the cloud from the other place, and basically we depend on both to build solutions.
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate for. I mean, if we're talking about Europe, right?
Yeah.
I'm a strong advocate for Europe to build this, let's say, transnational resilience, and I think there's been a lot of steps in the right direction from a policy perspective, but I think we still need to invest in infrastructure. That's like a super basic step from my perspective.
I think sort of that's in a way also the reason for setting up the next generation internet kind of way of thinking and perspective to get these ideas going and to think about this in a more creative and open way. And but what you're saying is that that so far basically we've been tackling things from, let's say, one end. We've been focusing on data, we've been focusing on privacy, we've been focusing to a certain extent on security. But as long as we cannot embed that into hardware and into infrastructures, basically what you're saying is that we may solve other people's problems, or we may come with solutions that do not allow us to reap the full value, basically, if we talk about this European sovereignty or this idea.
Yeah, just think about the current situation with the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Like the growth of the cloud services has been tremendous.
Yeah.
You know, if we had a cloud service, then we will have been able of, like, you know, basically keep the whole investment within our borders, allowing us to reinvest in our own education, for example. But we've been giving our education money to third parties big time. And again, you know, I think this makes me think a lot. And I think I'm completely against limiting policies, like limiting, like you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But I think we should encourage people to think about how to invest in more local services and systems, and more resilient services and systems that work for us, and try to embrace a different entrepreneurship model that would allow us to empower our neighbor, you know. And in a way, I think that's a very interesting thing by having David Lee here today, because he's talking about how that works in Shenzhen at the hardware manufacturing level.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of food for thought, because we need to rethink in which way we understand the way we build our systems, so we can empower people around us to also be part of this building, and also share responsibility, but as well as ownership, which is part of the whole open source model in the first place.
There's a question by Stan Eric in the chat, and that's basically going into the direction also where you've done a lot of work already, and Arduino is very strong. It's about how about integrating this maker culture infrastructure into public high school systems, so the innovation as an integrated curriculum in close to all lines of education. I think what he's also saying is integrating the maker culture also in the fundamental architecture and the infrastructure of schools and public systems.
Exactly. So I've been doing a lot of work in this regard since 6 years ago. I've been working, and this is actually what got me an award from the Ashoka Foundation, which is like basically trying to bring this concept of digitalization of education to upper secondary schools, and starting in Spain, and we reached thousands of schools in Spain. But there was this condition that we put, is that we had to work only with public schools, because private schools could afford paying for these technologies. And so we got a private foundation to pay for the whole investment. And we're talking about a couple million euros. And it was very successful. Like, schools were queuing up. And I'm telling the story because actually Sten Erik being from Sweden, I think you understand an entirely different philosophy to this approach. It's like in Sweden, because we tried in Sweden and it didn't work the same way. You have to really line up policy making, and let's say you have to work with the union. So because there's labor laws that says that if you're going to teach something new, you need to actually train yourself into teaching this thing. So you need to get a course, etc., etc. While in Spain, for example, people were volunteering to be part of this program in Sweden, it was really hard to get 10 teachers to be part of this program. When in Spain, we got thousands of teachers with the exact same, let's say, investment. So I think we also have to take into account which is the, I wouldn't say regional policies, I would say more like regional mindsets towards these kind of changes, because it obviously implies an effort from everybody. And I think counting on voluntary efforts works in some places and it doesn't work in some other places. And we shouldn't forget that actually in education, Sten Eric says that there is an ambition to have control. I think it's very much of a labor issue, and I think teachers in Sweden were right. It's like, this is my job. I'm working as a teacher, but it's my job, so I need to be compensated for my hours doing this. And it's a very valid point, and I think we should take that into account and consider it seriously. In Spain, we were very lucky. People had a different mindset, but I don't think we can blame anybody for the mindset. I think people are ready to make efforts and sacrifices when it's needed. Like right now in the middle of the pandemic, I have heard a lot of teachers complaining that they have to work online, but I haven't heard any students saying that they are not getting classes because their teachers are not trying. So I think we have to be very considerate and take these things into account. And when there is money, try to invest the money in a wise way.
Yeah. Yes. So, Babis, by this time, is David Lee still online? Can you bring him on stage, or is he have we lost him? Because if we've lost him, then we'll try again in the next year to get David on and continue this conversation. But so Babis, can you try to bring on David Lee?
It seems that he has a technical problem and cannot connect it.
Okay, I think there's a problem with David's connection, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so then so that's maybe if you can sort of keep trying for like 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes, but then
yes, of course, I'm trying, but
we'll set up another meeting in the next year and continue this.
Of course.
But just going back briefly to your point, David, sort of, I think, so if we look at what's happening at the moment, and with all the policies that are happening in Europe, and with the debate that's also happening on identity now, I think we're in kind of the same boat that you're describing, where we're either going towards these kind of fully centralized type of systems that may seem to offer convenience, that may seem to offer some very good advantages, but actually, because of their centralization, are less resilient when it comes to a lot of problems that we're going to face with climate change, with the running out of fossil fuels, and sort of all of these. We know we're going to face them, and we're facing a lot of unknowns now with COVID also already, which we couldn't have foreseen. So in this space on identity that we're sort of seeing, there's also kind of a push for something called SSI, self-sovereign identity, which is sort of thinking things back to the level of citizens instead of just looking at them only as customers, but citizens. And then if we talk about Europe, we talk about 500 million kind of citizens. And that's about trying to think about identity in a way as sort of trying that you expose yourself as a particular person to certain service providers and to all kinds of people who ask for data or identity or authentication or credentials. I think this type of thinking is much more enabling the kind of local, regional, federated solutions that we also want in infrastructure and architectures. So I think sort of this is kind of a story that we should and we should align. Sort of, we should, I think, align the kind of push that you're making for thinking about infrastructure and thinking about architecture in terms of how can I assist my neighbor. Sort of that's kind of the that's the logical kind of step I think that we should take. And then if we look at historical solutions of how cities got built, how villages got built, it was always kind of this local kind of federated sort of, we only had these very centralized solutions for quite, I would say, for not that long a period. So it seems that this kind of move towards scaling Europe into a 500 million zone should not entail sort of having a cloud for 500 million people, sort of that's not the case, but having a massive amount of local solutions that are just interoperable, that are somehow standardized, that can talk to each other. So Malmo can talk to Barcelona, but it shouldn't have the same architecture, or it shouldn't have the same cloud provider. Sort of is that a little bit the thing of that you sort of the kind of story that you think we could go?
Yeah, I was actually typing an answer to Gael saying that centralization is a problem of power distribution. When I'm talking about building European resilient infrastructures, I'm not talking about building a single system owned by the European Commission. So I'm talking about empowering, let's say, European infrastructures to be able of competing in this globalized world. You know, it's and I know that there is a lot of money in consortiums like the EIT consortiums for digital manufacturing and whatnot that are going in that direction. So that's why I personally think that we are taking the steps in the right direction, but we still haven't made it there. You know, and there's been approaches of building trans-European cloud infrastructure that just simply didn't work. And but you know, you have to keep on trying until one of them sticks. That's the thing. That's the thing. You know, and I think that we also really need to like understand. I mean, the whole idea of failure, I think, needs to be absorbed also at the political level. Like there will be projects that will fail, and that will be okay, and we should consider it money worth spent if it's a step in the right direction, if it creates a new operation stack that can help developing the next project, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so I think I don't think we have to look at it as a centralized approach. I think we have to look at it as the centralized approach, but you know, based on a collaborative setting. So I really think that's the way to go.
So thanks, David. Are you back now, David Lee? Are you back from Shenzhen? I think so. As we are waiting for David to get back on again, there's a question from Federico Bonelli, David, about Nextcloud in a box type of. So do you think that this type of like say building blocks for hardware, for software, data, kind of that they could work well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are an example as a company. We're an example of how you can bring these blocks to life without locking people into a service or locking people into a single provider. Like unlike other providers, for example, with Arduino hardware, you can just plug it to whatever other cloud you might be interested in, or you can just get the Arduino cloud service and plug in your own hardware to it. So I think that level of modularity is something that we should embrace. At the same time, I think we need to look at other aspects like syndication and stuff like that at a secure level. And that is one of the problems nowadays, I think, because of GDPR and so on, how that has to be handled. Not that it's not possible technically, I think it's perfectly possible. It's more that we need to find the right balance between development and governance of companies to get these things to work. And I think that many times, and this is another problem that we are observing from Arduino, is that many companies, they don't really understand GDPR at like let's say super granular level, and that brings challenges as well.
Thanks, David. I think so. What we'll do is if it's okay with you, David, we'll try to do this also again in 2021, and then we can actually do it quite focused and try to bring back David Lee from Shenzhen, because I think you brought up some very interesting points that he would love to react to, but he finds it difficult to connect at the moment. So what I would like to do now is bring on Adele, if she's here. Adele Jarolina, I think she's here.
I'm here.
Hello, yeah, Adele. And because you're part of this of the European Startup Network, and you're also part of this new initiative in. Let me see if I can also. This new initiative in NGI, which is called the TETRA. And because basically sort of this idea of startups, scale-ups, business, this whole notion of entrepreneurship, it's also been identified by Next Generation Internet as a very important building block that we need in order to make everything real, because it's not only about demos, and we want to make things real. Mm-hmm. So please, yes, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Rob. So hi, everyone. It's a very nice, a real pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm indeed from the European Startup Network. We are one of the partners in the NGI-TRUST project. And I would like to shortly introduce actually our projects and our services also that will hopefully be relevant and interesting for you. I will share my screen. You should be able to see it now. Is it the case?
Yes, we got it.
Perfect, great. So I will give you an overview of our TETRA project. So first of all, well, what is it about? So we are a project that has been co-funded by the Horizon 2020 program of the European Union. And basically we are a business accelerator, and we help projects that have received funding through NGI open calls to enter the market. And we do it via a series of services such as training, mentoring, access to networking as well. As you can see it here, so in training we have bootcamps and dedicated webinars on different topics such as sales, new markets, IP, we have investment, pitching, and much more. Actually, we are still developing them in 2021. We give also project access to mentoring. We offer personalized mentoring with experts, startup founders, investors, among others. We give our project access to networking, and this is done via matchmaking. So access to matchmaking, we connect the project with investors and corporations. And just to go more concretely, more in depth into this, so what do you exactly get actually from when you apply to TETRA services? So first of all, we have, excuse me, the very intensive 3-day bootcamps, which normally were actually planned offline, but we had to go online with the COVID situation, of course, and now it will take place online in 2021 as well. And the bootcamps, they are for building and scaling businesses and ideas. Then we also have for the businesses who attended the bootcamps, the most promising businesses. We have individual master plans, so personalized master plans with analytics guidelines for the teams who participated and finished the bootcamps. And we also give access to additional training materials and to networking, to contact for hands-on business development of teams who want to grow. So here I would like to share a few links with you. I will do it in the chat after my presentation. So the first one is a link with the recorded versions of webinars that we had recently on software IP protection, for example, also on open source software licenses, and they can be found on our website. I will share the link with you. Hopefully it will serve you and be useful. We also currently have an open call for Tenderio Plus subscription, and you can apply to get an access to public tenders. I will also share the link here. And I would like to introduce you to our bootcamps that we have, that I have mentioned earlier. So the next bootcamp that we are having next year is Scale Up Bootcamp, which will take place, as you can see, from the 16th to the 18th of March online, which makes it easy. Well, of course, it's more intensive, but it makes it easier as well, as you don't have to travel and to book accommodation. These are, as I said, intensive trainings and also mentoring for teams with more developed ideas and products. This is for teams that are aiming to scale their business. And then we will have a build-up bootcamp, which will take place between the 13th and 15th of April, online as well. We have had a first build-up bootcamp already, that is not mentioned here, this year. And we have had a very enthusiastic feedback from teams. And the second build-up bootcamp will take place in April. So I really encourage you, if you are interested, to apply, because there you will also, as for all of our bootcamps, get a very intensive training. You will get also mentoring from experts. And this bootcamp is for teams with less developed ideas and projects who really want to learn how to develop a value proposition, for example, how to build an idea into a business. And applications, the good news, are still open until February 2021. And just to give you better idea here again, the trainings I already said, but they also include business and team development, strategies for growth. We will have exclusive webinars to connect more with investors and expert mentors. We have had already, for example, a breakfast with investors where you can ask all of your questions, so very interactive. And also one-on-one mentoring sessions with dedicated specialists. You will have access to additional online materials, access to special deals. So yes, that's basically it. Also, maybe a few words about mentoring, the individual master plans and mentoring sessions that we have with investors and experts, and that organized after the bootcamp. So I will share with you the links that I have mentioned in the chat, so you can have a look. You can decide for yourself if it's interesting for you. But we would really be happy to have you, to count you in, to have you with us. So feel free to apply. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adele. This is, I think, a very important and very good step also in the whole, not only in the next generation internet framework, but in the whole of these European projects that a lot of time sort of forgot this kind of last step, which is actually going to the market and getting clients and getting customers and starting up and starting. So I think it's tremendously important. So yes, please put everything that you have in the chat, all kinds of links. And there's also going to be a report, and in the report that we will share also on NGI, all these links will be out there. So thanks a lot, Adele. Thanks for your contribution. I think if David is online, I'd like to David, we've had some remarks in the chat about maker culture and circular economy. Maybe could you comment on that?
Yeah, so you can hear me okay? Hello?
Because I think that's exactly where you've been doing a lot of work recently on this notion of circular economy and the way of this thing. So
yeah, well, I think
yeah.
Good. So I think I'm back online. I'm trying this on my phone. So yeah, I think for the circular economy is really coming down to having the people interested in this circulations, in this repurposed use of the system, to look at to take the powers of making the device back to their hand. There are interesting development. There are open source Android out there. There are
there are circuit boards, there are phone, which can run the open source, open Android out there. It comes down to being a community wanting that system. I think a lot of circular economy is getting stuck at the very policy level, and everybody loves it, but nobody wants to work on it. Providing the product for circular economy is not just answering to the customer demand. It's really getting the customer to more on the maker side, to say, okay, well, we want this. We can pull together our resource. We can go and order the device we want, and it's not that hard. I mean, we have done we've done a documentary project with Wall Street Journal, showing how to make your own smartphones in Shenzhen. It's coming back down to how open it is and having ideas in every stage. There are actually people who stood up and say, okay, well, we really want this stuff, rather than having this discussed in the very policy levels and say, okay, well, Apple should do this, Apple should do that, Tesla should do this, Tesla should do that. But instead is the acknowledgement of the driving by a constant design for oscillations. The big company is never going to embrace circular economy. It doesn't matter how much we push them. Just see how much Apple is fighting back on the right to repair. And that's even the minimum requirements to get started with circular economy. When on the other side, we can open up the door. We just need more people to try to come into this as entrepreneurs, not as a policymakers. It's easy. I mean, these days it's easy enough to write a couple policy paper, but it's hard to actually sit down to say, okay, well, we are committed to this. We want to build a true recyclable, affordable phone around the ideas of circular economy, to enable the right to repair, right to repurpose, and have a proper end of life cycle for all the device. But I think that's the things we can do today. But do we really have the community who want this bad enough to take actions?
I think especially on the right to repair, there's a lot of going on in Europe, and I think it's also been passed. Maybe Gail knows more about this, but I think the right to repair is something that's been worked on a lot. But I fully agree. Yes, Gail's put something in the chat here. I fully agree with what you've been saying. Maybe David, you want to respond to this? David Cuartelles from Arduino, about circular and right to repair, and especially this agency on device level.
Well, so first of all, I think I mean, that to me is a basic thing. You know, as a hacker, between air quotes, that's a must-have. On the other hand, I want to say that I think we should move away from the idea that the maker is the free repair shop. You know, I mean, as a person, because I have to contextualize my answer, because otherwise it sounds like really rough. But during the first wave of the pandemic in Spain, I've been involved in the creation of an NGO that is made by makers that were collaborating in a movement called Coronavirus Makers. And Coronavirus Makers, was a movement that existed over the first 120 days of the pandemic in Spain, and I was involved in distributing face shields made by the community. The community made over 1 million face shields, 3D printing it, and distributing it to hospitals, and the whole society got involved in working with this and so on and so forth. At some point, there was a technology transfer towards factories, and factories could produce hundreds of thousands in a week. And it was very interesting. And so there was a lot of conversation about how this could happen and so on. And so the next step right now is, since there's like a forced digitalization of society, and education is going towards being fully digital for many people for quite some time. There's a bunch of kids that don't have computers, and there's foundations looking at giving away computers, and there's companies willing to finance those computers. But then also there is companies willing to like give away the old computers that should be refurbished and put in motion, running Linux and so on. Then the question is, who is doing that job? And so all of these foundations that have a lot of money with paid employees are going to the makers asking, oh, can you make this as a volunteer, on a volunteer basis? If you have ever refurbished a laptop, you know that getting a random laptop with whatever conditions and installing Linux on it, it takes a whole afternoon. Yeah. And so they need to make 35,000 laptops just for a part of Spain. That's like the mission of the foundation for 2021. So they need about 60 people working full time, refurbishing laptops for the whole year. And they want those 60 people full time is times 12. You just make the multiplication, and it's like, you know, how many men months? And they want that to happen for free.
Yes.
And there is where I have a problem.
Yeah.
So that taking the maker culture that wants to volunteer when there is a need to become the free working labor for a lot of stuff.
Yes.
So I think we have to separate things. And I think that it's very unfair to put people in that situation. Again, when there is money should be well spent. And that's why I'm saying, like, I'm completely for right of repairment. That's why I got this great microscope here to repair stuff, you know. And I'm a strong defender of open source, open hardware, and so on. But at the same time, we need to also acknowledge the fact that people need to be paid for their working hours. That's I wanted to bring that up.
Well, I think that's I think that's exactly the kind of space, the mixed space in between that we've been talking about, where David from Shenzhen, David Lee, is saying, of course, policy is important, but it's about also doing things, getting things done, and making sure that you don't demand this in a paper, but you demand it with your devices, with your products, where you actually build a kind of compliance into the fact that everybody's using them. But basically, what you're saying also is that basically the sort of now asking makers to do things and then having this, which is basically also the argument that's been going on for artists for a long time. Sort of like, this is the kind of things that artists or design, or then sort of the gap that they have to fill. But that's not fair, and that's absolutely the case. So I think what we have in the chat now is an immense richness of ideas that Gail and me are going to put in a report, and we'll have a next session about this, because I think a lot of things were unearthed that we have to get back to. So the first thing we do is I want to thank all speakers for being here. It's been massively interesting. Thank the participants for bringing up a lot of good questions and issues. But I think actually now is a good time to look at certain policy objectives that are happening, and to make sure that this regionalization, this localization, and this kind of local agency on infrastructure and hardware actually gets much higher on the agenda than it is now. So with this, I think we have to close. So thank again Magdalena Kylie, who's also here with Elontech for doing this again with Gail and me and us. So thank you very much, Adele, for talking about TETRA and European Startup Network. and I've also been having some connectivity issues. So just walking around my room all the time, trying to get a good connection. But there I am. But so thanks David, thanks Adele, and we'll be back with a next session on this, and we'll focus it very much on this agency on localization and infrastructure and hardware. So thank you, everybody. I wish you a very good festive days. I hope everybody is doing the best they can, and let's keep it that way, and let's have a better 2021. Thanks. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.